Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Mayors from several of Canada's mid-sized cities congregate in Lethbridge to discuss the opioid crisis. The $900 million arena for the NHL's Calgary Flames is proceeding on time and on schedule despite the threat of U.S. tariffs. Car companies continuing to manufacture in Canada receive exemption from tariffs on the U.S.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Mayors from some of Canada's mid-sized cities have come to Lethbridge to discuss the opioid crisis. Officials from 28 different communities are taking part in a three-day conference that began on Monday, led by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. They're working on developing a municipal-led playbook on substance treatment, prevention, and recovery. BCN's Landon Hickok has more.
Elected officials from primarily small to mid-sized urban centres across Canada are taking notes at the Sandman Signature in Lethbridge this week. This gathering of municipal leaders aims to share ideas and practical applications for other municipalities to use in their response to substance use and abuse. Some officials say current models that are in place either for their community or province are not helping.
So often the conversations are happening in and about, the Vancouvers and the Torontos and the Montreals of the country. And so we felt it was important that we bring together municipal leaders from smaller, more medium-sized communities so that we could be having this conversation and it be relevant to us in our context.
So much of the toolkit, so much of the recovery model, the harm reduction models are focused around large urban environments. And those toolkits don't make sense for us.
Statistics Canada says that over 7,000 accidental drug poisoning deaths were recorded each year from 2021 to 2023. However, Lethbridge in 2024 witnessed a 63% drop in opioid deaths in a year from 2023. Elected officials elsewhere say Lethbridge and Alberta are leading the way in overdose response.
I'm very happy with what Alberta is doing. I think that they are the province to follow if we want to get as many people, save as many lives as we possibly can and get them on a road to recovery. They're the ones to emulate at this point in time. And being from Ontario, I think we're on that path now.
I would like to see people stop dying and that we would see hope at the end of the tunnel. I'm not seeing that yet from our provincial government, but I'm here with jealousy. So many people dying. Our city alone in last year, I think it was last year, had 92 overdose deaths. So we declared an official crisis, an opioid epidemic in I think 9 years ago, and we haven't made progress.
The hope from officials is taking examples from the conference, which wraps up on Wednesday, and refer them to their respective higher levels of government for application.
If we continue on the path of thinking that we have to do something like a consumption treatment site, instead of getting those rehab beds, the money into the rehab beds, the detox beds, the recovery beds, then we're just going to keep climbing the numbers that are dying. We're not going to solve the crisis. This is the zeitgeist of our time.
From Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Today in the legislature, the Alberta government introduced Bill 53, the so-called Compassionate Intervention Act. The bill would allow families, guardians, healthcare professionals, or police to force an addict into treatment when they're becoming a danger to themselves or to others.
Now, I do want to be clear, the Compassionate Intervention Act is not sweeping legislation that applies to every person who's dealing with addiction or substance use. It is only for the most serious cases where all other options have failed. It's important to remember that people in the clutches of addiction are unable to help themselves. The insidious power of addiction means the only thing that matters is their next high. It isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a treatable illness. And to families with loved ones suffering from addiction, compassionate intervention offers new hope. Hope that their loved ones can get the help that they need to break their addiction, connect with their families, and manage their life in recovery.
The government plans to spend $180 million over 3 years to build compassionate care centers in Edmonton and Calgary. Critics of the plan say while it has the potential to protect the safety of others, it could violate individual rights. Automobile companies that continue to manufacture vehicles in Canada will receive an exemption from Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne made the announcement that the auto manufacturers will be allowed to import a certain number of U.S. assembled vehicles free of the countermeasure tariffs Ottawa imposed in response to Donald Trump's levies. The vehicles must comply with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement on Trade. On the federal campaign trail in Montreal today, federal party leaders were commenting on reports that Honda is considering shifting Canadian CR-V and Civic production to the United States due to tariffs. However, Honda has since denied these claims. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was asked if he'd consider removing counter tariffs on the U.S. to incentivize Americans to drop them as well. Poilievre's response.
There's nobody who's going to be able to control President Trump, as Mr. Carney is learning, despite his promises. What we should do is focus on what we can control, and that is to reverse the disastrous liberal economic policies that Mr. Carney advised Trudeau to take that have driven up taxes, blocked our resources, wrapped our businesses in red tape, and driven $500 billion south. We need change. We can't afford a fourth Liberal term. We need change to axe taxes, cut red tape, approve resource projects, make this the best place in the world to do business.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh called the Honda report concerning, noting it's just another reason Canada needs to shore up production at home. Meanwhile, Liberal leader Mark Carney didn't comment specifically on the report, but says he remains focused on getting Trump to remove tariffs on the Canadian auto industry. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says the head of Honda Canada has told him the report of Honda moving manufacturing to the States is inaccurate.
So I just got off the phone with the president of Honda Canada, and they're sending a statement out clarifying what Reuters said. It's not accurate at all. They want to increase production down in the U.S. They're at 100% capacity right now. So they're going to make a statement, and I'll let them make their statement. But they're saying that's not accurate.
Most polls show the Liberal Party leading with the Conservative Party hot on the trail. Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun, says it's Ontario that the Conservatives must win over in order to win the election.
We've seen some polls that are a bit closer still with the Liberal lead. One poll that seems to be an outlier even has the Conservatives tied, effectively tied, or within 1 point of the Liberals. So look, at the end of the day, the Conservatives need to win in Ontario. Right now, they're not. They're doing well in BC, another must-win area. They're doing very well in Alberta. We expect that. But they need to rise up in Ontario, and that is just not happening at the moment. So we'll see what these debates are like. We'll see what the last 2 weeks of the campaign are like, but that's got to be their focus.
Catch my full interview with political commentator Brian Lilley coming up right after Business News. Saskatchewan's premier says he wanted to take a breath before he decided how to penalize an MLA who called Jagmeet Singh a terrorist. Raquel Hilbert made the comment in the legislature 2 weeks ago, but has apologized and retracted the statement that some have called anti-Sikh hate. Premier Scott Moe says it was incumbent on him to take a breath so as to make a responsible decision that is representative of the people of Saskatchewan. He says he has written to the Sikh Society of Regina and the Sikh Society of Saskatchewan, explaining Hilbert has been relieved of her extra duties and that the province appreciates its Sikh community. Residents of 2 Alberta villages are concerned after learning there will be no polling locations in either community. Voters in Champion and Carmangay, about 40 kilometers northwest of Lethbridge, are being told to cast their ballots in the village of Lamond, almost a full hour away. Elections Canada says it's a byproduct of the recent redrawing of riding boundaries, and there are no locations within the communities that meet its requirements for polling locations. But some residents, including many seniors, say they can't afford to make the trip, and the move is forcing some to forego their democratic duty. The new $900 million arena for the NHL's Calgary Flames is proceeding on time and on schedule, even with the threat of U.S. tariffs. The new building, to be named Scotia Place, is scheduled to open in the fall of 2027 and will replace the Saddle Dome used by the Flames since it was built in 1983.
Concrete and excavation were all done locally, and those are very significant contracts. I think we looked at Canada first as an example with the steel. Steel is being part of it being procured in Europe, and then it's shipped to Hamilton, and that's where it's being fabricated or manufactured. So any opportunity to avoid having even some of the suppliers having to avoid going through the U.S., through their U.S.-based companies, is something that we look at.
Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services is reminding residents to stay clear of active emergency scenes and give crews room to do their work. During last weekend's fire in the 1200 block of Pacific Circle West, emergency crews said onlookers and vehicle traffic significantly disrupted and delayed access for fire, police, and utility partners. One driver collided with a police vehicle while distracted by the fire, and utility crews were hindered in reaching the area to shut off gas lines. Lethbridge Fire says these situations aren't just inconvenient, they are dangerous. With strong winds being a common occurrence in Lethbridge, the risk of fire spreading quickly increases, making rapid response even more critical. You are reminded to avoid active fire and emergency scenes, keep roadways clear for emergency vehicles, and follow all detours and instructions from emergency personnel. The worldwide popularity of pickleball has spread to Lethbridge. The Lethbridge and District Exhibition, along with the Lethbridge and Coaldale Pickleball Clubs, are putting on a huge tournament from May 2nd to the 4th. Paul Kingsmith, Director of Community Engagement for the exhibition, says the event will boost the sport in southern Alberta. The event will be held at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center. Kingsmith explains the importance of having a venue in Lethbridge that can host an event of this kind.
To bring in an event like this is really meeting a community need. It's what we heard from the pickleball clubs, that they needed a location to host something like this. They needed the resources to host this size of tournament, and they have bigger goals in mind as to where they want to go with tournaments like this. So to be able to provide a venue and be a part of building this tournament is really something that we're excited about. You know, when we look at revenue opportunities for LDA as an organization and for the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center as a building, we identified strategic areas where we want to be involved. Obviously, agriculture is at our core. Trade events and conferences make a lot of sense, but we looked at the sport realm, and with the space that we have, we're looking at whether or not we can host volleyball and basketball type events in those trade halls with the wide open space that it is.
We want to hopefully expand this into a regional sport so that we can hold provincial tournaments and hopefully a national tournament. And they can only be held in facilities such as this because we have the space. We can expand from 8 to 16 to 24, as many courts as we need. So if we have 1,000 players, we would need upwards of 24 to 30 courts. They held a Canadian national tournament in a very similar facility in Regina, and it was very, very successful. So that's our ultimate goal, is to hopefully hold a Canadian championship here in this venue.
The tournament will feature men's and women's singles and doubles matches, with as well as junior boys and girls categories. It's a Tier 4 Pickleball Canada sanctioned event and will even include referees for all medal matches. Sound like so much fun there. Speaking of sports, the Canadian women's hockey team went 3-1 in pool play at the World Championship. The Canadians know they'll have to be sharper in the playoffs in order to defend their world title.
I think we're in a good place. I'd like our play to be a little bit better than it has been, but I also have enough trust in the group that we'll find it and we'll figure it out. Our just details and some of our execution is not right now where we want it to be, but you got obviously the preliminaries done. You hopefully in that quarterfinal game you can kind of tighten things up a little bit, make some better decisions.
I think it's just honing in on the details of our game, just having good stick details and continuing to pressure our opponents. But all things that we're all used to doing. It's just a matter of doing it on a consistent basis.
Turning our eyes overseas now, tens of thousands of people gathered at the holiest Jewish prayer site in Jerusalem today for the traditional priestly blessing prayer. The Birkat Kohanim, or Cohen's blessing, is a ritual dating back over 2,500 years to when King Solomon's temple stood on the same site. The blessing is performed by male Jews who can trace their lineage back to the priestly caste and takes place 3 times a year during Judaism's major holidays.
So every year, this prayer is extremely special. It brings a lot of blessing to the nation. This year especially, I wanted to come down here and see how the blessing comes down and hopefully will help the hostages and the entire nation of Israel that is under extreme duress, especially this year.
I came to Birkat Kohanim this year, as I try to do every year. It is extremely important this year. It's hard for us to believe that we still have hostages that are not able to come home and come and be here and join us with this.
Jews are currently observing the week-long holiday of Passover. And speaking of Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a surprise visit to troops in northern Gaza on Tuesday, according to his office. However, they did not provide any details. Netanyahu told media, quote, "We are fighting for our existence. We are fighting for our future." Netanyahu has previously entered Gaza a handful of times during the war. And residents in the town of Chelsea, Michigan, have found a creative way of moving a bookstore. Instead of hiring movers and loading up a moving van, they moved 9,100 books by hand. The old Serendipity bookstore and the new Serendipity bookstore are about a block apart. So about 300 people formed a line to move the books one by one. The endeavor took just under 2 hours, much shorter than hiring a moving company to box and unbox the thousands of titles. The Book Brigade even put the books back on the shelves in alphabetical order. So fun. It looks like they had great weather there too. Speaking of weather, we saw a gorgeous high of 21 degrees today, but we might need to trade in those sunglasses for rain gear or even some winter wear. I'll tell you why right after this. Welcome back. Well, it was a beautiful day as we reached that high of 21 degrees there and lots of sunny skies, but things are about to take a turn. Wednesday, quite a bit different story here. We might want to switch in those sunglasses for maybe a hat and some gloves because we are going to be dipping down into the single digits, high of only 4 degrees. Also seeing a chance of showers mixed with flurries. By the end of the day, their accumulation of the white stuff could look like 2 centimeters of snow. And then as we get into Thursday, mainly cloudy skies, also single digits, high of 6 degrees, and finally jumping back up to those double digits on Friday, high of 10 degrees with clear skies. And then 18 on Saturday with lovely clear skies as well. And then on Saturday evening, we're seeing a 60% chance of showers. Into Sunday and Monday, both highs of 10 degrees and a 60% chance of showers and or flurries. So be prepared for that. Looks like winter is not quite done with us yet, even though the calendar says that we are halfway through April. Average high for this time of year, 13. Average low, 0. 28 was our record high on this day, happening back in 1926. And in 1953, it was a record minus 17. That was the record low on this day. 6:39 is when the sun rose this morning. Sun set this evening at 8:24 p.m. So we're seeing 13 hours and 45 minutes of daylight, getting close to that 14-hour mark. Okay, on the West Coast tomorrow, for the most part, clear skies there in both of those cities. They're high of 17 in Victoria. Vancouver sitting at 13, 9 degrees the expected high in Edmonton tomorrow with 60K winds and increasing clouds. Now Calgary sitting at 7 and looking at a 30% chance of flurries. As we get to the rest of the prairies, we're seeing a lot of wind, actually wind gusts up to 60 kilometers per hour in all 3 of these cities. We got a pair of 11s, sitting for a high in both Saskatoon and Regina. Saskatoon could see a mix of snow and rain, a 30% chance, and then mix of sun and cloud there in Winnipeg with a high of 14 degrees. Looking to the central part of the country now, Toronto seeing a high of 6 degrees and looking at a 30% chance of flurries. Ottawa also seeing some flurries there, light periods of snow ending by the afternoon, high of 3 degrees, high of 5 in Montreal with mix of snow and showers in the morning. By the afternoon, that's going to be just showers. Getting into Atlantic Canada here, 9 degrees for the high in Fredericton, 60% chance of showers there, 30% chance of showers expected in Halifax. 12 for the high of 8 degrees in Charlottetown. Could see some periods of rain there. And St. John's seeing fog developing in the morning, dissipating by the afternoon, periods of rain and drizzle with a high of 9 degrees. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Statistics Canada reported the annual inflation rate slowed to 2.3% for the month, down from 2.6% in February and lower than economists' expectation. StatsCan said falling gas prices were a big factor, as were a drop in prices for travel. Michelle Zidikian of the Canadian Press has more.
Canadians got a break on inflation in March. Statistics Canada reported the annual inflation rate fell to 2.3% for the month, down from 2.6% in February and lower than economists' expectations. StatCan said falling gas prices were a big factor, as were a drop in prices for travel tours and airfares last month, as fewer Canadians took a trip to the U.S. March marked the beginning of the U.S. trade war that has led to Canadian consumers foregoing American products and traveling stateside. CIBC senior economist Catherine Judge says the inflation data paves the way for the Bank of Canada to cut interest rates at its meeting on Wednesday. The key lending rate currently sits at 2.75%. BMO, however, notes the path forward for the central bank is less clear, as policymakers are operating in the dense fog of an ever-shifting trade war, and core inflation measures are bumping up against the top of the central bank's target range.
Canada's trade war with the United States helped to drive down inflation last month. Stats Canada says Canadians paid less on airfare as fewer families went south of the border for March break. A TD Bank economist says, while some costs might rise in the tariff battle, some Canadians might also find a savings. The Bank of Canada now has a fresh inflation data as it prepares for its next interest rate decision coming up tomorrow. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the annual pace of housing starts in March slowed compared with February. The National Housing Agency says the seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts arrived at 214,155 units for March, down from February. The change comes as the annual pace of starts in centres with a population of 10,000 people or greater fell 2.8%. The annual pace of rural starts was estimated at 10,870 in March. Meta, the company behind the Instagram and Facebook, says it will start using publicly available content from European users to train its artificial intelligence models. It resumes work put on hold last year after activists raised concern about data privacy. Stringent European Union data privacy laws give people control over how their personal information is used. Meta notes a panel of EU privacy regulators have affirmed its original approach, met legal obligations, and says it won't use private messages to train its AI model. Now here is a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 201 points on the day to finish at 24,067. The Dow was down 155 to 40,368. The S&P 500 was down 9 points to 5,396, and the Nasdaq was down 8 points to 16,823. West Texas Intermediate oil was up a cent to $61.53 US per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to $3.32 US. Gold was up 17.15 to $32.2958 US an ounce. Silver was up a cent to $32.30 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.79 per bushel, barley is at $6.79, canola is at $15.12, and corn is at $8.15 per bushel. Live cattle were up 85 cents to $204.80. Feeder cattle were up $1.32 to $289.37, and lean hogs May contract was up 25 cents to $88.20. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 71.70 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, mayors from some of Canada's mid-sized cities have come to Lethbridge to discuss the opioid crisis. Officials from 28 different communities are taking part in a 3-day conference that began on Monday, led by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction. They're working on developing a municipal-led playbook on substance treatment, prevention, and recovery. Polls are showing the Liberal Party is leading the Conservatives. Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun, says it's Ontario that the Conservatives must win over in order to win the election. That interview is coming up next. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Just 2 weeks to go in the federal election and lots to discuss here. So I'm bringing in political commentator Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. Hello, Brian. How are you today?
I'm well. Good to see you, Jeanette.
You as well. Okay, so Brian, the Liberals are still ahead in the polls, but there appears to be some momentum from the Conservatives. So would you agree with that?
I do. Daryl Bricker, who's the CEO of Ipsos Global Public Affairs, one of the oldest, biggest polling firms in Canada, he said that, excuse me, that he's picking up momentum. We've seen some polls that a bit closer, still with the Liberal lead. One poll that seems to be an outlier, even has the Conservatives tied, effectively tied, or within 1 point of the Liberals. So, look, at the end of the day, the Conservatives need to win in Ontario. Right now, they're not. They're doing well in BC, another must-win area. They're doing very well in Alberta. We expect that, but they need to rise up in Ontario, and that is just not happening at the moment. So we'll see what these debates are like. We'll see what the last 2 weeks of the campaign are like, but that's got to be their focus.
Yeah, and of course, there's always plenty of discussion about polls and then versus the rallies. And some people, of course, say they don't even believe the polls. So where do you sit on that question, Brian?
I do believe the polls. And look, I know folks will say, well, 2016, they got it wrong. Hillary, they said was going to win, or Brexit. Look, those were bad interpretations of the polls. I looked at the same polling results and I predicted Donald Trump would win in 2016. I looked at the same Brexit poll results and said, okay, Brexit, the leave side is going to win. It's interpretation and knowing how the map works in an election. And that's why, the national polling numbers, very interesting, but really what you need to focus on are the regionals. So Conservatives are doing pretty well in Quebec. They're not doing well in Atlantic Canada or Ontario. If they're not going to win in Atlantic Canada, they need more seats in Ontario. And right now, the Liberals are still poised to win the majority of seats in Ontario. So you can only win every seat in Saskatchewan once. You can only win 32 out of 37 seats in Alberta once. They need to win in Ontario. That's got to be the key to this election.
Also, with polls, it's all dependent on how many people are surveyed. How many people are surveyed in the general polls that you are looking at here, Brian?
It ranges from the serious pollsters. It ranges from around 1,000 to, I think Abacus Data recently put one out. It was 2,900 people. Look, there are polls that I think are less legitimate than others, but the main companies, Ipsos, Abacus, Leger, these are well-respected polling firms that have gotten the last several elections right, or minor differences. One party got 18% instead of the 19% predicted in the poll. Well, that's a pretty good, determination ahead of time. And so, do the rallies matter? Absolutely, the rallies matter, and it's a sign of how committed Poilievre's voters are. And even the polling shows that the Conservative voters are more committed, more determined to vote than Liberal ones. We'll see if that changes, if it solidifies. Poilievre's got to, if he's losing with people over 55, then he's got to hope that everyone that's committed to voting for him under 55, and there's more of them, 19 million versus 13 million, he's got to hope that every one of those under 55 voting for him brings out a friend or a spouse or a relative. And if they do that, then yeah, he can win.
Yeah, as long as they think like that spouse or relative, right? Brian, lots of anger aimed at your Premier, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, after he made comments about the Conservative campaign. So what was he thinking? What was he saying?
Well, this goes back to Corey Teneycke, he's worked for Stephen Harper in the past. He's run Doug Ford's last 3 campaigns. He's been very critical of the Poilievre campaign, saying they should be focusing almost exclusively on Donald Trump, because that's the ballot question, he says. And that's the ballot question with voters over 55. Well, in my view, Poilievre does talk about Trump a lot and how his plan is better. In fact, we talked about that in the lengthy sit-down interview I did with him on Saturday that you can find at the Toronto Sun or on our YouTube channel. We talked about that off the top and about what it feels like having old friends attack you in public. But Doug Ford yesterday was downstairs from where I'm sitting now here at Queen's Park, and he got asked about Teneycke's comments because people were saying, well, he must be speaking for the Premier. Well, Doug Ford turned around and said, well, I think Poilievre would be doing a lot better if Corey Teneycke was running the campaign. This goes back to really bad blood between Poilievre's campaign manager, Jenny Byrne, and Doug Ford. Jenny Byrne worked for Doug Ford on his first election campaign. She was his principal secretary for about the first year, maybe not quite the first year of his first term in office. And they did not part on good ways. And so there's a lot of animosity back and forth. Interesting book to come out about all of that and the behind the scenes stuff after this campaign's over.
Wow. All right. The debates are this week. So French on Wednesday, English on Thursday. What are the topics that they'll be discussing, Brian?
So each debate has 5 topics. It'll be things like energy and climate. They're lumping those 2 in together. Trump and the tariffs obviously is going to be one of them. Building the economy is another one. So these are the issues that they're going through. Both debates are in Montreal. The French debate is being hosted by a guy named Patrice Roy, a longtime CBC Radio-Canada journalist, well-respected across the province of Quebec. And then the English debate is being hosted by Steve Paikin. He is the host of a show called The Agenda here on Ontario's public broadcaster, TVO. And he's hosted these many times before. He is not an opinion journalist at all, and generally perceived as a straight shooter, not someone who's going to try and put their thumb on the scale. So that's why he's hosting. And it's just that one moderator. It's 120 minutes each. Strangely, the Green Party is in, even though they don't have all the candidates that they claim they did. They said they registered all of them, but not all of them are actually registered. A lot of questions about whether they should be in. I'll tell you this, Mark Carney wants as many other leaders on that stage with him as possible, because the more people attacking him, the better it is for him. He's kind of the incumbent. He's definitely the front runner. And when you're getting yelled at by a lot of people, the audience at home sits back and goes, well, being kind of mean to him. And it works in their favor.
Wow. Okay, so speaking of, I guess, being mean, so Mark Carney just apologized for Liberal campaign workers passing out buttons at the Canada Strong and Free conference in Ottawa to make it look like Poilievre Conservatives were just like Donald Trump. So, Brian, you have something to say about this, and you're even comparing it to some old buttons from 2006 that were handed out way back.
Yeah, this is an old tradition in politics, but normally it's just about making fun of your opponent. And so there were buttons that had Jenny Byrne, the campaign manager's name, crossed out, and then Corey Teneycke put underneath it, saying that Pierre should fire Jenny. There were ones that just made fun of the Conservatives. and that's normal. But it's the ones that said, stop the steal, and do you believe the polls? These are attempts to say that the Conservatives are just like Donald Trump. So that's why I think these ones cross the line. Look, here's an old button from the 2006 Liberal Convention.
Can't believe you still
I don't know
have
if you
that.
can. Don't know if you can see that. It's
Yeah.
it says Uncle Iggy wants you, and it's Michael Ignatieff, who was running back then. Didn't win. You have vote Bob. Who needs Ontario anyway? Referencing back to Bob Rae's disastrous time as Ontario Premier. There's a lot of these things. If they're in good fun, that's fine. If you're trying to fool people to make them believe that these guys are something they're not, you could be in trouble with the law. A few lawyers have looked at it and said this could violate the Elections Act, could be a violation of the law. We'll see where that goes, if anything. The two staffers in charge of it, who this came out in a story because they were boasting about it in bars in earshot of journalists, they've simply been reassigned. They haven't been fired. They're just given different jobs in the campaign, no longer making buttons.
Oh, interesting. I'm impressed that you still have those buttons from 19 years ago, Brian. Oh, wow. Okay, so Brian, Pierre Poilievre announced this week that he would pass a law to bring back consecutive life sentences after the Supreme Court struck down the law in 2022. So he says he'll use the notwithstanding clause to keep mass murderers behind bars. So how are other leaders reacting to this?
Strangely, they're not going with where I think the mood of the public would be. And they're saying, well, we have to defend the charter. We have to stop this from happening. Look, there was a law in place to allow this. And so when Alexandre Bissonnette did the Quebec City mosque shooting, I think that was 2017, he was given a 40-year sentence so that he would not be out of jail until he was 60 years old. So he got 40 years instead of 25 before he's eligible for parole. The court struck down this law, saying it was cruel and unusual. And, it had only applied to a few people. You had to be a mass murderer. I believe it was Justin Bourque who killed the 3 Mounties in New Brunswick. Apologies if I got the name wrong there, going off memory. He also got a very long sentence. And these sentences were struck down by the court, saying it was cruel and unusual punishment. Well, Poilievre says he'll bring it back and he'll use the notwithstanding clause. I don't know anyone that says, yeah, mass murderers should get out faster. But Mark Carney was asked about it, and he said, we can't do this because it would be a violation of the charter. He's absolutely wrong, because the notwithstanding clause is part of the charter. It's section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows Parliament or a provincial legislature to overrule the courts. And that was a negotiated part of getting the charter accepted and passed. So Mark Carney ends up looking like he's standing on the side of criminals rather than standing on the side of protecting society and looking out for victims.
Oh, gosh, interesting. We were speaking of polls earlier, and okay, so what's happened to the NDP in this election, Brian? They're in the single-digit support in many polls, and it seems to be helping Mark Carney and the Liberals. And I think Jagmeet Singh has even given in, saying he's no longer running for PM, but he's hoping for at least enough seats so that there's not a majority government, basically.
I don't understand this. You've got the NDP down at 8%, 6% in some polls. I think their best showing recently, but this was a week or two ago, was 11%. They're headed to not perhaps having official party status. And a good chunk of that support, not all of it, but a good chunk of it has gone to Mark Carney and the Liberals, which is why they're ahead of Poilievre and the Conservatives. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are still at 38, 39%, depending on the polls. Stephen Harper won his majority government with less than that in 2011. Justin Trudeau won his majority government in 2015 with 37% in the polls. This should be enough to form government, but the NDP has utterly collapsed and the Liberals are the beneficiaries. Who would have thought that the socialist NDP would be all in favor of a central banker, Goldman Sachs past employee who just resigned from running one of Canada's one of the world's biggest asset management companies. But that's where the NDP is at the moment. Jagmeet Singh, he showed up with a lot of promise several years ago to take over after Tom Mulcair, but he hasn't been delivering. Let's put it that way.
Speaking of that, Brian, do you think that Mark Carney is still being pressed enough on his Brookfield company and all of his assets and whatnot? Is it still coming up, or is it kind of starting to fade?
It's still coming up. He did have to answer questions about his personal income taxes this past week. When the NDP and Conservatives started pointing out that Brookfield was using tax havens in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, I thought, well, if you're going to dodge taxes for your company, what's to say you wouldn't dodge, paying taxes here in Canada? It took almost a week to get an answer to the simple question of where did Mark Carney pay his taxes since coming back to Canada in 2020. They put out very strange statements, and still, I would say they haven't answered that question fully. The issue of taxes and tax havens and his asset holdings, these are all questions that make him very testy, as does China. I'm sure you caught it last week where he snapped at a reporter for asking a question about China. So that's going to be an interesting part of the debate. Both Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney have tempers, and they can lose them. Whoever is able to keep themselves under control and get under the skin of the other leader is going to have the better debate night. And given the fact that Poilievre has years of experience and training at this, I'd say that it's likely that he will be able to keep his cool. And the question will be, will Mark Carney be able to keep his cool as Poilievre raises these issues in a live televised debate? Because you know that one way or another, he's going to find a way to get in a shot about dodging taxes, and Carney's going to respond. Will he respond calmly, or will we see that anger that seeps out sometimes at journalists pop up?
Yeah, it'll be interesting debate week for sure to see if there's any fireworks for sure. Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Well, lots happening in the political arena with the federal election underway and, of course, the ongoing tariff war. Alberta's premier has laid out a list of 9 demands to federal leaders. So here to talk more about that is Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities, Nathan Neudorf, who is the MLA for Lethbridge East. Nathan, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you again for having me.
Of course. Okay, so Nathan, the federal election obviously has been called, and Premier Danielle Smith, she's laid out these 9 demands to federal leaders, including no emissions cap on oil and gas. Now, Smith says Liberal leader Mark Carney told her privately that there would be no cap, but now is saying, well, actually, there will be an emissions cap. So how important is this election to Alberta's economy?
This election is incredibly important to Alberta's economy and to Alberta's future. We have been struggling with a federal Liberal government for many years that continually tries to slow down or stop altogether our oil and gas economy and make it more difficult, continually reaching into provincial jurisdiction, which we tell them time again, don't do, and we have to fight them in court, and we inevitably win. And we do unfortunately have a long list of federal leaders that come to Alberta, promise certain things here or say them quietly to us, and then they go say something different when they get back to Ottawa. So we hope Albertans are paying attention, and we hope Canadians are paying attention and vote for a government that actually puts Canada and all Canadians first instead of just their own political interests.
I think it was actually the same day that they flipped that. I believe it was his environment minister that, that sort of went publicly on the other side of the country saying, actually, no. So, Nathan, do you believe fellow politicians, when they suddenly change their mind on these issues at election time, particularly when for decades they have been maybe like for carbon taxes and against building pipelines?
Yeah, I don't. And I don't think any Canadians do. It's what gives politicians, all colors, all stripes, bad name. When you say one thing in election time, you say something different. I know it's something that I would ask them to look at. It's very important to remain consistent in the face of potentially some pushback. I know I've had challenges, whether I talk about issues that are important to Lethbridge, but if it's been a platform promise I've got to stay consistent and say the same thing from when I was first elected 6 years ago to today. And I would hope that people would pay attention if federal politicians are changing their tune after decades writing books about carbon taxes and reducing emissions and then promising to go a different direction. I find it a little bit hard to believe, and I'm sure many of your watchers do as well.
Now, Premier Smith actually mentioned the possibility of a referendum if these 9 demands are not met. So she sounds pretty serious. So to what degree are you hearing rumblings about Alberta separation?
Well, we are hearing rumblings, certainly. And we are, I believe, the Premier very serious to take our lead from Albertans, which is why we've got legislation to allow for citizen-led referendum. And if those issues are important to enough Albertans, they can move that forward, and we want to listen to that. We're proud to be part of Canada. We want jurisdictional guidelines to be followed, and we want people to work together. But when Alberta consistently is taken for granted, consistently sees our resources and our wealth transferred to other regions of the country against our wishes and not reinvesting in Alberta, that's hard on the people of Alberta. So we really hope that a government will be elected in Ottawa that works for all Canadians, no matter where they live, and shows that equality that we're so proud of when we wear the red, white flag and watch the Olympics and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. Very patriotic times these days, for sure. You know, one thing we can't get away from right now seems to be the talk of tariffs, and the tariff wars continue with the U.S. and now with China, meaning that Alberta canola farmers are looking at 100% tariffs. So the Premier had mentioned the possibility of selling canola to oil companies for use in biofuels. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a great initiative. When you're faced with challenges, which will result in a very difficult time selling to one of the largest economies in the world, we have to find other solutions and other answers. And this is one where we think there's a great opportunity. Albertan companies are very innovative. And while, of course, our farmers, ranchers don't want to have to find new markets, they will do what they need to do to continue to make sure that we prosper as an economy. And selling for biodiesel, biofuels is a great alternative. And maybe it fills the gap for a short period of time, maybe it fills the gap for a long period of time. But making sure that we have diverse avenues to different markets so we're not restricted when one or two choose to do something like this, I think that's the best path forward.
Nathan, how well do you think Alberta is positioned to get through a tariff war with the U.S.?
Well, we're all going to feel it in many different ways, but I believe that Alberta is amongst the best position for provinces. We've already seen our leader do a tremendous amount of work, and at least for now, the promise is that if energy is taxed, it'll be at a much lesser rate than a 25%, and we're hopeful that we can alleviate those tariffs altogether. Beyond that, we've seen a great resilience from our ag industry and other machinery and manufacturing industries. We've got more work to do. We hope that cooler heads will prevail, and the integrated nature of our market will allow for good talks, good negotiations, so that we can de-escalate this and work to better both Alberta's economy and the U.S. states' economies. They're heavily reliant on a lot of products out of Alberta.
Yeah, for sure. Now, switching gears a little bit here, the United Conservative Party continues to get a lot of negative publicity over allegations of corruption in the Alberta Health Services contracts procurement process. So do you have any updates on this? Is there any evidence being produced by either side in this conflict?
Well, there is likely evidence that is going into 3 different independent investigations. It's not coming to us. Obviously, we are participating fully, transparently. There's the Auditor General, who's having a look through their office, completely independent. Our government has appointed Judge Wyatt, Raymond Wyatt, a former judge from Manitoba, to run an independent investigation, and he's working on that. Hopefully, a report will be tabled by the end of June. And of course, the RCMP are also doing an investigation, which we're fully cooperating with. We know this is serious. We are participating fully. And we, like everybody, want to know exactly what's going on and make sure that government is serving the needs of Albertans, and healthcare is doing it appropriately.
You mentioned the end of June there. Is that when Albertans might get some answers on this AHS issue, or do we have to wait for all of the 3 investigations to be complete?
Well, the one that I have details on is Judge Wyatt will have a final written report that will be made public on June the 30th.
All right.
So, yeah.
That's good. Right now, it seems like a she said, he said argument over all of this until those investigations are done. So looking forward to that for sure. Now, Now, Nathan, as Minister of Affordability and Utilities, you've been involved in restructuring the electricity market. So can you give us a brief recap of what's changed and how reliable the grid is, and maybe what options are available to Albertans?
Certainly. Our grid is more reliant and reliable than ever. Thankfully, we had about 3,000 megawatts of dispatchable generation come online last year. So we're in a very good place in terms of generation right now, but we continue to grow. And believe me, affordability is top of mind for my ministry, but all ministries within our government, because people are feeling the pressure of those bills. What's the challenge really is that when we made the fast change from coal to renewables, while generation costs in general came down, intermittency or variability of supply went up. And what that meant is we had to do a whole lot of additional purchasing to fill the gap when it wasn't windy or when the sun wasn't shining. And then added to that is our system wasn't built with our transmission lines for over 200 unique sites. It was built for about 15 coal mines, which have now all been converted to natural gas, and they don't move. But when you add 200 more sites, you put up a lot of lines and wires, and those contracts typically stretch over 30, 40, or 50 years. And those are much more difficult to get down, the cost down on people's bills. We only have 2 options: get more people, more industry in Alberta to help pay their share of that, or export more of that power to other markets. And we're trying to do both, but it's going to take a little bit of time. The good news is right now, we have a reliable system. We've got lots of generation. Now we're trying to balance it and balance those costs for Albertans. So costs come down today and over the long run.
Yeah, definitely a good time to be doing that. So, Nathan, you have also been involved with the development of artificial intelligence and data centers in our province. So how are things looking for us, and what are the benefits that this is going to provide?
Well, I think everybody's heard a little bit about AI data centers and all the things they can do. And obviously, we're all becoming more reliant on computers and computation. And they need a lot of electricity. And right now, that's something that Alberta has. And they also need power lines, data lines like fiber optics. They need people to work, and they need water to help cooling the generation or cooling their data centers themselves. We have all of those things if we put them in the right place. So, of course, this is another terrific opportunity for Alberta to lead the world, diversify our economy, increase job opportunities for our graduates from our post-secondary, and hopefully lead a development of a whole new industry within Alberta, which is AI data and computing and intelligence, and the effect on our post-secondaries for computer engineers and AI data and what they can do with that across the spectrum is a terrific opportunity. And I love being part of it. And I love that Alberta can have the chance of being a global leader in this area.
Would this be one of the centers that Kevin O'Leary is involved in?
Yes, his group has proposed one up close to Grand Prairie. They're working on that as well, and they're working with our regulators to make sure that they adhere to all the laws and legislation within Alberta, because I can't emphasize it enough. These can be great if we do it right, and we're very committed to put Albertans first and make sure they receive the benefit of this, because there have been jurisdictions where a lot of data centers went in without great planning, and it did push some prices higher in the electricity realm. We're very aware of that, and we're doing all the work to make sure that we don't see that happen here.
Yeah, is this kind of a first for Canada? Is Alberta kind of the center, or are there other areas of the country that are doing this, to your knowledge?
There's a lot of interest across Canada, but Alberta is the best position to respond because we have a very robust, innovative private industry that can build the generation and build the data centers. All the other provinces in Canada have a publicly owned utility where the government would have to invest with taxpayer dollars to build the generation, which is not cheap these days. And that's more difficult for them to do. So that's why it's a terrific opportunity for Alberta.
Speaking a little bit more locally here, are there any new developments that you are aware of with respect to further development of the Lethbridge Regional Airport? It's so key to making Lethbridge a better business destination.
It is really one of the hubs that we need to work with, along with the Exhibition Park and our universities and colleges, to make sure we get that business travel. We know the municipality has done a terrific amount of work investing in that. The province has contributed. Unfortunately, right now we're sort of waiting for the outcome of a federal election, so we have someone to talk to about making sure the federal government and their customs portion of it for international trade and flying, that's sort of the missing piece right now, but hopefully we'll get there maybe in about a month or so.
Yeah, it would be lovely to fly to a sun destination straight from Lethbridge without having to drive up to Calgary or whatnot. Yeah. Now, Nathan, on the education front, what are things looking like for new schools in Lethbridge?
Well, we've got some terrific news out of this latest budget. We have another new elementary school for the public school division on the west side. We know that's where a lot of the growth is in Lethbridge. So this will be the third school in about 5 years that will be announced. We're looking forward to that. And on top of that, we got some pre-planning funding for our Holy Spirit School Division for St. Francis Middle School right downtown. That's one that has been in desperate need of some investment. We're very excited to see that on the list, and hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll see it progress through planning and then to construction dollars. Two really exciting announcements in the budget for Lethbridge.
Amazing. I think we're about out of time here, but thanks for being with us today, Nathan. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks so much for all the questions and your great job informing Lethbridge people and Albertans and people all across Canada.
Thank you, Nathan. Nathan Newdorf is the MLA for Lethbridge East and Alberta's Minister of Affordability and Utilities. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.